Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome. Welcome to the Infinite Way, where spirituality meets humanity. My name is Dr. Enolia Foti, and I am excited to be here with Susan Barnes. Susan Barnes is a preeminent executive leader coach for purpose-driven founders and executives. She also is a founder of Prosper, a process to help you better understand your money and the measures required to build a healthy financial future. Additionally, she is a published author, painter, speaker, and devoted meditator. Welcome, Susan Barnes.
Hi, Anelia. So happy to be here with you.
So excited to have you here and so excited to discuss the work and the foundation of your work because what you do is so needed and so powerful. But before we get started in talking about the actual Prosper and the executive coaching, I'd love to deep dive just a little bit into who you are and what you bring to the table. Can you share a little bit more about yourself and how you came to work in finance, in the financial area?
Sure. Um, I was really good at math as a child. It was a natural gift for me. And in the course of taking uh, more advanced mathematics courses through high school, I was given the opportunity to take an accounting class, which was like a piece of cake for me. And up until that point in time, I wasn't sure what I was going to major in. And I was like, oh, I can major in this. Great. And so that's the path I took when I went to university. And um, finance in particular came about through my internships while I was at university with public accounting firms and the ability to choose which industry I wanted to flow into. And I ended up in finance predominantly because of the money that's there. Um, I I knew that I had a responsibility not just to myself but to my mother, who's very sick, to be able to care for her financially. And so I picked the career path that would allow me to make the most amount of money so that I could fulfill my responsibilities as a daughter.
As you traverse that path, and here you are looking at finance and with the set intentions of what you wanted to get accomplished, were you able to accomplish what you were looking for? Because I know that you took finance a different direction, didn't you? And not just like private use or just working for a finance company.
Um, the the career that I chose ended up serving me really well. And I had, for all intents and purposes, a successful career. But it wasn't ever really aligned with my soul calling. Working in finance, working for hedge funds actually was pretty challenging for me because I could see the way that the current financial system is set up to really propagate a lot of um, the ills that I see in the world. And it was really hard and recognizing myself as contributing that to an indirect way because I'm contributing my life energy um, in doing what it is that I do for this industry. And so there came an opportunity where I was able to leave that career um, and I took a couple of years to deeply soul search and understand, what are my values really? Like, how can I employ my gifts in the world in a way that feels like I'm not compromising any aspect of my integrity.
And I want to talk about that soul's calling a little bit because I work in corporate, as you know, also. Okay. And how it showed up for me as a soul's calling is this fundamental realization that I was aspiring to be like people I didn't even like,
Mm,
you
mm,
know, and it didn't align because I could see the manipulation of people's lives and longing to be somewhere else.
mm,
And I want to talk about this just a little bit because what happens is that people ignore their soul's calling
mm.
constantly. And they're like, okay, yeah, I don't want to be doing this. How do I get out? I feel trapped. I really need to do this because the responsibilities that are imposed on me, because how do I justify to my family that I don't want to do this anymore? And they feel trapped.
Yeah.
And how did it show up for you in terms of being able to respond?
When I made the decision that I was going to leave the industry, I planned to work one more year and collect one more bonus. And it was during that year that I became intimately acquainted with my own psyche and my own fear response. All of the ways that my mind crafted excuses for me to not take this risk. Um, it's far easier for us, I think, to remain in a sphere of comfort and familiarity, even if that existence is a painful one, because uncertainty is such a phenomenal blank slate that our imagination can project onto all of the most uh, unsupportive and scary things. And I recognized this process in myself and had to go through a deep excavation of everything that I believed to be true about the world and myself during the course of this year. Stay one more year, just get a little bit more money and padding before you leave. Who do you think you are, trying to leave this world and go out on your own and have the world teach you? Like, that's ridiculous. Like, following your intuition, that's insane. And so, like, really being in conversation with this narrative that was unfolding and having the deep sense that the disheartenment that I felt and the general, I think, malaise that underlined my day to day, just consistently coming back to, there has to be something better than this. There has to be something that I can do that makes me feel better, and that I don't have to make excuses for fitting into a box or a particular unilateral definition of success that doesn't actually make sense to me when I really, really consider it. Um, and I think the last thing I'll say here is that I think oftentimes there are circumstances that we can't avoid. I myself, coming from that place, like, I took on this role and responsibility to care for my mom. And it was only once I was actually liberated from that was I able to step outside of what otherwise would have been a life that I would have continued to live for the sake of fulfilling my duties. Um, as a daughter. And I recognize that not a lot of people have that same agency and ability to do so, because circumstantially it just might be impossible. But for the people that are trapped in their circumstance and know that it doesn't feel right for them, there is certainly an opportunity to be courageous and brave and really honor the parts of you that are communicating that this isn't right, and begin to entertain that perhaps they're speaking up because there's some truth there.
Mm. And you offer through Prosper
Mm.
an opportunity for one of those facets to be fulfilled, because in order to take that leap, we need to be able to have financial flexibility to be able to expand, to redirect, to no longer be in debt so that we can function and move and have the flexibility that we're looking for to dare to step into some of our visions that are frankly alternate of where we are at the moment. So talk to us a little bit about Prosper.
Sure. Prosper was born out of a desire to help a friend who was looking for uh, advice around expanding his business. And when I asked him what his personal financial goals were, he was like, what do you mean? I don't have those." And I was like, "Okay, well, we need to start there, because we can't begin to think about the future of your business without thinking about the future of your personal resources." And um, the exploration and recognition of the fact that he's not unique, he's not an outlier. He's actually, majority of the people in this country, generally unfamiliar, avoidant, um, just not really knowing how to work with money, how to work with money in a way that can support being resourced in this world. Fundamentally, not having the type of education that I think is really foundational to us being able to navigate this world in a really secure way. Prosper was born from that, a desire to be able to help people in this regard, to get them more relationally intimate with their money, and um, and sort of change this, what I feel is a contentious relationship that most people do have, primarily because we're all here to offer our gifts. But if we are under resourced, then our capacity to enact our will in the world, that is the purest channel of the essence that we came here to give, is compromised. And there's no aspect of that kind of existence that's appealing to me. Everyone should be prospering. Everybody can be prospering. And so this is the underlying ethos and motivation behind what it is that I do with Prosper.
And when you say that, it makes me sit here and think about the relationship that we have to money. Money is energy. And we don't necessarily have or have ever been taught how to work with that energy. So what happens is that we look at never having enough because we were brought up with not having enough to be able to go to school. It starts right there,
Hmm.
right? Because for those of us who dare to go on to university because that's where you chose to go, or you chose for your future to pass through, or college or higher education at all, most of it's unaffordable.
Hmm.
So here you have this young person embarking on their life, getting ready to get started, and the first thing that they hit is, I don't have enough. So I don't have enough to go to school, so I borrow. So I start off in debt. And
Hmm.
then because I'm starting off in debt, I don't have how am I going to function here? I already have this debt. I don't have enough. How do I function here? I already have this debt. I don't have enough. And when we engage on life, at least in the United States, starting out with being in debt and not having enough, which creates this poverty consciousness at the very root of before we even come out the starting gate to live
Hmm.
our lives as young adults and adults.
Hmm.
So how do we surpass that energy of not having enough and gleaning a proper relationship with money so that we can hold that vision for ourselves and dare to walk towards that vision of surplus and having enough?
Yeah. There's a couple things that I want to touch on with respect to what it is that you're pointing to. Um, there are undeniably a lot of um, uh, systemic conditions that really make it difficult to build wealth in this world from an early age if you are coming from a socioeconomic demographic that from the gate has to borrow money in order to make things happen. And it's interesting because, you know, you and I had spoken earlier about the difference between maybe scarcity and abundance mindset. It's
Yes.
actually something that's coming to mind in this moment of a couple of perspective shifts around this in particular, where there is this story that debt is bad, that all debt is bad. And one of the things that I elucidate on with respect to Prosper is, you know, how to build wealth and the differences between how the wealthy behave versus how the non-wealthy behave. And there's a recognition in the sphere of wealth that debt actually isn't a bad thing. When you get to higher and higher levels of financial wealth, debt is actually the tool that's being wielded for the wealthy to grow their assets. They're not using their own assets to take risks and make more money. They're using debt instruments they're using other people's money to grow their money. And so there's one mindset shift in that regard when it comes to debt. So when I think about this from coming to university and having to borrow money, there's nothing implicitly terrible about having another lifeline of cash to allow you to be able to take advantage of an opportunity that you wouldn't have otherwise. There's an abundance there, actually. The issue is that there isn't a clear roadmap of what to do with that debt and how to live in a particular way that then can actually foster wealth building over time. We're just kind of saddled with debt. We are not saddled with the abundant wealth of knowledge about what to do about that and how to build a life for ourselves. And so oftentimes that debt will create a gap in wealth building between those who had to borrow money and those who didn't. And what causes that gap to increase over time is the inability for people to recognize like the way that that debt can be worked with and paid down quickly versus most people just stringing it out over time and having interest accumulate and have that continue to eat in the potential wealth that they could be building over time. Now, this isn't to deny the truth of how the wealth gap exists in America specifically, and how, because of these systemic implications, there are people that have an opportunity to get ahead with wealth building versus those who don't. But there is in that moment an opportunity to see, like, yes, debt in this instance is not great, but it allows us the agency to get an education that can then allow us to create higher and higher tiers of income generation for ourselves versus if we never went to university at all.
So I listen to you and I understand the premise of this,
Mm,
right? But then, as if I were coming to you as a client,
mm,
right? Here I am, I'm a small business, I'm a small company, and I don't have this mindset,
mm,
and here I want to be able to create wealth. And I have this poverty conscious kind of attitude because that's all I've ever known systemically,
mhm,
right? And I know that I feel like I'm drowning in my debt.
mhm.
And I think that I'm speaking for a great number of people out there that are creating small businesses, are entrepreneurs, and they just don't have this relationship with the money. They just don't understand that gap or that bridge
Mhm.
that actually shifts them from one area to another. How do you work with that?
It's very much a case by case basis because poverty, as you're naming it, poverty consciousness or scarcity mindset, is
Scarcity
something
mindset.
that's deeply entrenched and behaviorally uh, significant in terms of the choices that are being made and whether or not an individual is actually seeing a possibility in front of them versus something that is keeping them trapped in the circumstance that they're in. And if I was speaking with a client, like hypothetical about this in particular, I would be in the excavation process of like, how did we arrive here? And how is it going for you? And do you actually want your circumstances to be different? A lot of people say, yes, I don't want this, I don't want this. And then they don't really change too much around it. And they don't do the work that's necessary to shift them into a completely different way of being. Um, but we would do that examination. And, one thing that um, I would pull into this conversation too is the fact that, like, when it comes to poverty and scarcity and this not enoughness that you were talking about before, um, it completely closes off the imagination to creatively uh, source opportunities that are existent and possibilities that are available. It's almost as if the aperture and lens of our innate creativity as creative beings becomes siloed and stunted because there's suddenly every opportunity that presents itself, it gets shut down, right? And so it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in this way. And so a part of that would be to continue to open up and see, why is there a rejection of the possibility that lies in front of you? There's no end to the amount of income that we can generate. There's no ceiling to that, except for the self-imposed ceiling and limitations that we internalize based upon our perception of reality and our place within that.
And I love what you're saying, and what you're saying is really, really, really powerful because when I work with people in my masterclass, Empower to Succeed Through Self Mastery, one of the things is to be able to look oneself in the mirror and to value and love what you see and to confront the limited belief systems that we have about ourselves, right? And to understand that, people throw judgments all the time. So it doesn't mean that you have to embody it. It doesn't mean that you have to act upon it or be it, receive it as it's your truth. And
Mhm.
that if you do not do the work to really change the mindset and your approach towards life, let alone just money and the energetics of money and how you're living, then it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what happens is that people don't realize that if you limit your belief system to say, all I'll ever be able to achieve is this, then how you deliver the information, how you go after certain things will all be framed in, I will only be able to get this far. And
100%.
so until we confront that mindset and until we confront that limited belief that we can live and expand way above and beyond that which we thought we could do, then we'll only meet our own status quo. So it starts within and it starts with us
Yeah.
in order to transcend that attitude. And I guess I bring this up because I believe that personal development in conjunction with financial planning and expanding, along with entrepreneurial leadership, along with executive leadership, along with all of the types of leadership, needs to stand on a foundation where we've worked on ourselves. We've worked on what makes us traumatized that would prohibit us from stepping into that leadership that is willing to take the risk, is willing to shift the mindset or viewpoint in order to engage upon something that you typically wouldn't do. What are your thoughts about that?
I love what you're saying. There's so much truth that exists there. With anybody that I'm working with, there has to be a willingness to change, and a willingness, usually for my prosper clients, where they've arrived to a precipice in their life where they're like, I don't want to be here anymore. Um, and there's a willingness to do whatever needs to be done to change the circumstances that they find themselves in. And, so much of this work with Prosper with Finances, with executive leadership coaching, so much of it is an excavation of what is really not holding, what is holding us back, essentially. Um, Money is like a person, and we can learn so much about ourselves, our psyche, the way that we orient to the world when we just examine and inquire, like, if money were a person, how do I
Mm-hmm.
treat money? How does money treat me? What do I think of money? And it's one of the clearest reflections of what's going on inside of us and where our blocks lie, depending upon the way that we answer that question. And I'll tell you, like 95% of my prosper clients have very contentious relationships with their money and the way that they perceive it. And that to me is where we begin the work. Why do you feel like money's going to abandon you? Right? Because money isn't a person, truly. Even though it's a relationship that can be anthropomorphized, money is just a neutral object. It's tangible, but it's not bringing its projections, it's not bringing its trauma to the table. And so the way that we are perceiving money and the way that we navigate money can tell us so much about what actually needs to shift in our own being and way that we're thinking about things and our behaviors to come into a much healthier relationship with this entity. And it's similar with executive leadership. It's all internal work. We'd spoken about this earlier, but I see entrepreneurship, I see building a business, I see building anything as a spiritual journey where you are getting direct accelerant feedback from the universe around you, depending upon the ways that you are enacting your will in the world and the ways that you're not enacting your will in the world. Like, you can't be the same person that built a $0 to $1 million business as it takes to get to $50 million. There's no way that you can be the same person in the process of that. And oftentimes the excavation process in tandem with building a business is recognizing, like, oh, you said you wanted to do X, Y, and Z to raise revenue by 50%, but you haven't done any of those things. What's going on? Right? And so there's
Right.
so much information and feedback that can come through the process of building, similar to, the example that you brought before, the small business owner, the entrepreneur that's existing in poverty consciousness. Like, Why is your business failing? What's happening in your own expression in tandem to what it is that you're trying to build, where these blocks exist and it's not working for you? And maybe you're accumulating more and more debt. There's something there that definitely wants to be looked at and seen. And your business won't actually do well, like as well as it possibly can, in implementing all of the strategic actions. It will fall by the wayside until inner congruence is actually found and felt, and all of these things that are inhibiting the progression of the business itself are dealt with.
And we're going to get to executive leadership. I have a whole set of questions I want there, but I want to just finish this up in the respect that I want to talk about shifting a business's energy,
Mm.
shifting a business or a company or a corporation's energy. And I know that part of that comes through leadership, and we'll get there. But people don't realize sometimes that an overall business has energy, and how that leadership oversees that business and where you are as an individual and as a leader, and the work that you've done, and the boundaries that you hold has a direct impact to the expansion or the contraction of your business.
Yeah,
Will you talk a little bit about that?
for sure. Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes I walk into circumstances where uh, executive leadership is like, everybody that works here is terrible and I don't think they're going to last long. And that to me tells me so much about leadership, because the ways that people are responding or working or not working in a company and how they're treating each other is a direct representation of the type of culture that's being set at the top. And an unwillingness for an executive to take ownership of their role in that um, is what allows this particular distortion to perpetuate itself. And only by holding up the mirror and allowing executives to see that, it doesn't have to be this way, and you have a choice in this, um, and starting to make the subtle shifts, does the energy at the top begin to shape the way that the organization itself is expressing?
Exactly, exactly that. So as we look at how businesses and corporations and companies or entrepreneurs actually set the tone with the energy that they're projecting out, what does nirvana look like? What does I've arrived, everything's flowing the way it's supposed to? What does that environment feel like?
Um, so I'll give a couple of examples. So I'm going to just kind of define things the way that I do. This is not how they're defined, but this is my own particular nomenclature. I see a difference between a company, a business, and an organization. Companies are what our most entities are in the world. They are effectively disorganized, incoherent, and operating at a place of what I name as being mediocre rather than excellent. Um, a business is a company that has figured out how to make money. And an organization is a company that's actually coherent. It's actually a thriving, healthy, creative, communicative environment that has reached a place of particular synergy internally, that they're able to effectively action and implement the processes that are required for them to uh, execute on their strategy. And the difference between those three different types of entities comes down to the kinds of environments that are being cultivated internally. And what I mean by that is, a company is ineffective, it's disorganized, there isn't effective communication. It's missing all of these really important pieces of everyone coming together and being unified on a particular goal and mission, and vision for that matter. What ends up happening is people are bringing their traumas um, to the table. People are bringing their conditioned experience of what it is to be working in an environment from past jobs and roles, and fitting themselves into the political configuration that exists within the places that they are, which for the most part are usually toxic. There was a Gallup poll that I read a couple of years ago that said 75% of working environments are toxic environments, and I think that's an understatement.
I believe it.
And
Yes.
so in these particular places, although they may be functioning as a business,
Mhm.
they are existing in a space of mediocrity, primarily because they haven't been able to attain this level of synergistic cohesion that will allow them to become an effective organization. Um, we know what it looks like when everyone is aligned on the same vision and they are generative in their creativity, in their support, in their collaboration. It's less about being productive and more about being creative. Um,
Mhm.
it's you can imagine like a figure skaters, a pair of figure skaters, where they've come into such deep trust and relational respect for one another that when they move together, it's powerful because they're both moving in the same direction. And what any one of them could have done on their own is amplified by the fact that there's this co creative element that's a part of what it is that they're doing together in their dance. And organizations are similar. There is a particular way that energy can be harmonized. And then, as a result of a collective will, not just one person, but a collective will, can accomplish extraordinary things in the world. I was just having a conversation with this with a friend last night about this, about affecting the causal field, where if we're all looking in different directions, we can't actually aggregate our energy into a potent laser focused direction to shift the world around us. We're getting stumped and stumbled based upon our own internal experiences, desires, wants, that although we may see the vision, we aren't necessarily aligned or coherent in our ways of communicating with one another, or seeing one another, and respecting one another. And because of that, all of this potential energy that could propel us forward is actually diluted. And so when I think about leadership in particular in businesses, I think about the responsibilities that leaders hold in creating the types of environments that can foster that sense of trust and respect. And that to me is what takes any sort of entity from mediocrity into excellence.
And I love what you're saying because really what you're basically pointing out beautifully is that we are energy, we are like nature, and nature repeats. It's a fractal, right? It repeats and it repeats, it repeats, right? So what do we choose to repeat? What do we choose to amplify in our attitudes? What do we choose to have in terms of a ripple effect as we dare to endeavor to stand in our truth and our leadership and
Mm.
our own agency? And if that is not in a positive mindset and setting the tone of holding beautiful space and not, not a toxic environment, then that's what we're rippling out.
Yeah.
That's what we're repeating. So let's step into executive coaching and the fact that I don't necessarily want to say that all executives feel this way. It's too much of a general sweep. But there's this first thing start. Don't think with your heart, think with your head. Get your head into it. Okay? And when I think of this, I think of like the Heart Math Institute that basically said that there is a neurology around our heart. Our heart is actually thinking, and that the heart leads the head. It's not that ego's bad. It's not that ego is should be displaced, but the heart should lead the head, and then we dare to step into it, and not the other way around. And a lot of times, what happens is that people react based on what they are encountering versus really coming from that inside out of leadership. And I just wanted to get your thoughts and your feelings around that.
There's a thread that I follow, which is the recognition of just kind of our evolutionary scope as a species and where we are still behaving in accordance with particular social patterns and precedences. that dictate the way that we are showing up in our circumstance, often forgetting that there is choice available to us. And so when you speak about a reactionary approach, this quality of reacting is somewhat a part of this still this aspect of us that's still slowly, some people are already there, some people will never be there, but slowly moving
Mhm.
into more responsive, proactive, adaptive, rather than like, oh, this is happening now and I must suddenly now do this thing. Um, and with that being said, there are some aspects of reality that just like we will never be prepared for, and we will have to react to some degree. But there is a way in which the current landscape of how we do things, and not just in business generally, but how we do things in life that come from that very reactionary place. And that reactionary place is oftentimes being resolved through the lens of the mind. So you're talking about this distinction between what's happening in the head and what's happening in the heart. And what I think you're pointing towards is the recognition of the imbalance that exists here and
Mhm.
the requirement of kind of bringing all parts online. Um, I'm such a fan of this, generally speaking. I think, um, you know, none of nature acts in isolation. No tree is cut off from its leaves or its roots. It's a whole system. And a lot of the ways that um, I know there's predominant conditioning is this glorification of the mind and the intellect and analysis. And there is so much disembodiment. There's no relationship with the rest of the entire body, which is kind of crazy. Like if a tree no longer had a relationship with its roots or its leaves, it wouldn't
Yeah,
be able to survive. All of it
right.
must be online. All of it must be communicating with each other in order for it to be able to thrive within the ecosystems that it is seated. And we are no different. And I think that a lot of the way the business is currently run is with this same sort of disembodiment as an organization, as an entity, generally speaking. And as a leader making decisions, our ability to tune into our entire system, our whole body, not just our heart, but all of the parts of us that are speaking to us continuously through sensation, through emotion, things of this nature, is for us to come into relationship with the environments that we are a part of. There's far more information that's coming through us that most of it gets blocked out when we're looking at it from our mind state perspective, because there's only so much that we can process from that lens, and that lens itself is also biased towards what it's already experienced. And so so much of the information that's getting filtered and what we're experiencing is already using a template that is inherently non-creative. It's looking for more of the same. It's looking for what's familiar. And so the natural unfolding creative evolutionary process that's available to us moment to moment oftentimes gets usurped by some sort of past patterned onto the present. Dropping into the body and feeling into sensation as we are in connection and relationship to everything around us allows us to have far more access to relevant information about what is actually unfolding in front of us, and
Yeah.
allow that to inform what wants to occur, not what I think should occur, but more importantly, like what seems to be emerging creatively out of the field itself that wants to be lived, breathed, experienced, and actioned upon. And coming into relational harmony, both the mind, the heart, the body, the feet, the fingers, whatever parts of you were
Mhm.
speaking to you, because they're all like, this is all life. Your trillions of cells are living and picking up and communicating, coming into relational harmony with those things and allowing the seed and locus of your decision making process to be a flexible one in that regard serves ultimately whatever organic organism, organization configuration that you find yourself in.
And as an executive coach, you are working from the top down. So you're working with CEOs, you're working with the people leadership that's at the top.
Mhm.
And you have to have at times come across the egos where they are not taking in consideration the totality of the whole system, of their whole system, let alone how they're impacting in relation to their company's
Mhm.
totality of the whole and
Yeah.
system. So how do you help a leader make that shift to bring in that awareness that says that I need to step in the agency of the total system of me, let alone of the company, in order to shift that toxicity, that part that feels cut off from the core.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes if I'm dealing with someone like that, it's because the ego has no sense of the possibility of some other way of existing.
Yeah,
And it becomes just a slow process of unfolding, of being able to cultivate the awareness of, oh, you see, when this happens, that occurs. What happens if you try something different? Notice the way that someone responds differently to you. Notice the way they actually make the deadline rather than missing it. Um, and it's just a slow pointing towards, primarily because the ego is can be such a rigid structure and is so fear-based and afraid of shifting itself for fear that it will be annihilated. And so depending upon, it's a case by case basis, but depending upon who I'm engaged with, there is an experiential component that can take time. Sometimes it's fast, but oftentimes, depending upon how tightly wound that ego is and protective of its existence, it's a very slow process of testing for them to come to the realization on their own. I can't tell them this stuff. I can't. It will not land. It will be so
yeah,
rejected and
and
persisted because of the implications of what that means for the way that they have been orienting their entire sense of self and the way that they've been orienting in the world. And it's interesting because it's like, one of the things that I kind of keep in my repertoire and toolbox is the recognition that there are 6 different types of leadership styles, that most people adopt one of them as their default natural way of being in the world and leading. One of them is known as the coercive style, which is do what I say,
right,
right? There's an authoritarian one, which is not like authoritative in the sense of like dictatorship, but more so someone that guides everyone, that holds the vision and guides everyone to work towards the vision in the way that they actually want to and can. The difference between coercive and authoritarian is authoritative, sorry, is that coercive is actually really beneficial for companies that have fallen by the wayside and need sort of emergency tactics to reorient them onto the right path. But the
right,
weakness of coercive is that it creates an incredibly demotivated environment over time. If I have no space as a staff to express myself and contribute meaningfully, I'll never feel heard. I'll never feel seen. I'll never feel appreciated. And I'll lose all connection to the vision myself. And that has significant implications. Authoritative is an amazing leadership style that actually fosters creativity and allows people the spaciousness to show up in the fullness of themselves and contribute, which is so essential when you're talking about organizational structures as entities, as organisms, where in order for the vision to realize into tangibility, it can't be done through one person. It has to be done through the multiple perspectives and skill sets that are available at that
yeah,
point in time. And so even just sharing, there's 4 other ones as well, but even just sharing this with leaders, especially leaders that have such rigid ego structures, starts to soften, starts to create the contrast that's necessary to reflect themselves back to themselves and see that there's actually options available to them to choose. But again, depending upon the rigidity of their ego, their sense of safety, all of these factors, there's very much it's a very delicate process to support the unfolding into a way that can help leaders see things differently, especially when it's a counter to the status quo.
yeah. I can't believe we're coming up on an hour. This has gone so quickly, but I want to just name a couple of things that you pointed out. I want to go back to Prosper,
Mhm.
because Prosper is such an essential tool needed across the board. In knowing that so many people have to begin somewhere and they don't know where to begin, this is where you start. When you hold a vision for yourself, when you have a dream for yourself, when you want to dare to walk the path of life and achieve this long-term vision that you have set as your goal, then there's a certain amount of self-discipline that takes place. And there is a certain amount of motivation that takes place. And if you could just share with us any tips or tools that you would have for Prosper, and then also taking that realm and bringing in the leadership, and any tips and tools that you would have for executive leadership. I would dare to say I would love to know the other four versions of leadership, but I think that they need to engage you in order to find out. So
Yeah. Um, so I'm going to share is something that I think actually straddles both sides, because fundamentally the work is the same, at the end of the day. With respect to Prosper, you have to be in recognition that in order to exist in a different financial reality, you have to become a different person than you are now. And there has to be a willingness to transform. Um, and that willingness to transform has to come also with the recognition that it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have to step outside of behaviors, thought patterns, um, that are so uh, second nature to who you are as a person. And a lot of this discomfort is going to come from peeling back the layer of a culture that is incredibly superficial, that people will often create and project the image of wealth, and doing well financially to the detriment of their own financial well-being. And that there is a quality of humility that is implicit to building wealth. You can't spend beyond your means anymore. You have to accept where you are, as painful as it is. And it's interesting because, like what I found in most circumstances, money and otherwise, is that a lot of what compels us is an avoidance of actually being able to recognize where we are. There's such a deep desire to be anywhere other than where we actually are, and so much we will do to project that. But the first step is actually just accepting and getting okay with the fact that things aren't as you want them to be, and meeting yourself in that place of total honesty. And that's where the change begins to happen. One piece more for Prosper is, you know, as I mentioned earlier, when we do this work and we talk about wealth building, I bring up a lot of the differences between the wealthy and the non-wealthy, in terms of their behaviors. And working in the hedge fund world and being around a lot of wealthy people, generally speaking, the wealthy people don't avoid their money. They're not in avoidance around it. They know exactly what's going on with their money all the time. They are checking their accounts. They are ensuring their inflows and outflows are par to what they would expect. And they're following up on anything that's a deviation from that. And so if you're a person who's generally avoidant when it comes to money, and you might be like, oh my God, know what's going on with my money every day. Start with just once a week and recognize that this behavior shift is actually quite significant and already being able to help you step into a sphere of wealth generation.
okay.
When it comes to executive leadership, when it comes to business, again, I mentioned, entrepreneurial endeavors, people that are running companies, all of this stuff is incredibly spiritual. It is a spiritual journey in and of itself. I mean, like all aspects of life are, but talk about enacting your will and creating something in the world and having a feedback loop right away to mirror all these aspects within you, that the world is responding to. And I think our ability to recognize the implicit obstacles and challenges that arise as a result of enacting our will in a creative way are there for us to develop and grow. They're not there to make us angry and have us be in a victim state of like, why is this happening? The creative process itself is fundamentally messy, but it's a test of our own volition and capacity to develop and adapt and move forward despite all of the invariable things that will arise. And our resilience in that, along with our recognition that we're not supposed to do any of this alone, right? Like there's a lot of lone wolf mentality. I mean, that's the
Yes.
stuff that causes burnout. And there's so much available to us when we open up our aperture of um, aperture, respecting and recognizing that all of life is interdependent and interconnected. Nature itself doesn't act in isolation or in a bubble, because that means atrophy and death of an ecosystem. There's so much available to us all the time, if we recognize that like we are a social creatures and our configurations socially are one in which like my strengths can complement yours. And when we are both looking towards the same horizon together, there is so much more that we can accomplish in that regard. And so um, opening up ourselves to the remembrance that there is more available to us to support us along this way if we are willing to abscond from the narrative that like I must do this myself, I must be independent in this, and it's all me, ego. And instead recognize that there is abundant prosperity available to us when we open up our hand and extend it outwards in a sense of help, support, and otherwise.
Absolutely. Wow. So for our audience and for those who might be interested in engaging you for financial management through Prosper, or they want to engage you for executive coaching, how can they reach you?
Sure. So with respect to executive leadership coaching, you can email me. My email address is ms.susanbarnes@gmail.com. That's ms.susanbarnes@gmail.com. And with respect to Prosper, I actually don't do financial management. I do advise on prosperity, which is very different. I
Okay.
create a clear pathway for people to see how to create wealth, but I don't tell them how to actually do that themselves. There are professionals that are licensed, like financial advisors, for example, that can actually advise on specifics. But what I do is very supportive in terms of just being able to understand your money better so that you can make better life decisions. And you can find me there at prosper4.life online.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that clarification.
My pleasure.
This has been another episode of The Infinite Way, where spirituality meets humanity. And Susan Barnes, thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for all of the knowledge that you bring to the table and your contribution to humanity. What you do is important, it's powerful, and I would suggest if this resonates with you, you need to engage her, see her, and work with her. She's phenomenal.
Thank you, Anolia. It's been a pleasure.
Always, always a pleasure. And so, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it, please like it, please subscribe, and gift this to somebody who needs to hear these words. That's why we do this. And that's why we have beautiful professionals like Susan Barnes here to share that knowledge. So, I want to thank you, and we will see you next time on the next episode. Again, that's The Infinite Way, where spirituality meets humanity. Bye bye for now.